The emergency alarms echoed through the crystal halls of the Galactic Council's headquarters for the 7th time this month. Each wailing note carried the same terrible message. Another world had gone silent. Another billion souls consumed by the machines that called themselves the Devourers. Chancellor Orem pressed his 6-fingered hand against the cool surface of the viewing wall, watching the holographic display update with fresh horror. The red markers that showed conquered systems now covered nearly a quarter of the Outer Rim territories. 12 worlds in 6 months. At this rate, the inner colonies would fall within a year. The great assembly hall buzzed with the nervous chatter of 47 different species, their voices creating a symphony of fear that the universal translators could barely keep up with. Representatives from the proud warrior clans of Centauri argued with the logical philosophers of the Vega system. The ancient dragon-like beings from Draco spoke in hushed tones about prophecies and endings. Even the crystalline entities from the Pleiades, normally silent observers, pulsed with anxious light patterns. 3,000 years of peaceful cooperation was crumbling in real time. The traditional battle formations are useless, declared General Corax from the Centauri delegation, his forearms gesturing wildly at the tactical displays. Our ships move in perfect formation, strike with calculated precision, retreat at optimal intervals. The enemy adapts within minutes. Every strategy we've used for centuries becomes worthless. The Vegan representative, a tall being with silver skin and large black eyes, nodded slowly. Our computational models show the same results. The Devourers learn from each engagement. They incorporate our technology into their own designs. What destroys one ship makes the next 10 stronger. Perhaps we should consider surrender, whispered someone from the back rows. The suggestion sent a ripple of shocked silence through the assembly. Chancellor Orem turned away from the viewing wall, his ancient eyes scanning the faces of beings he had worked with for decades. Some showed determination, others barely contained panic. All of them looked lost. There is one option we have not discussed, he said quietly. The hall fell completely silent. The humans. A wave of uncomfortable shifting passed through the assembled delegates. The humans, the galaxy's newest spacefaring species, barely 2 centuries out of their home system. They had been requesting full council membership for 50 years. 50 years of being told they were too young, too aggressive, too unpredictable for civilized galactic society. The humans are barbarians, snorted the draconian ambassador, smoke curling from her nostrils. They wage war like animals. Their entire history is one of constant conflict. Yes, agreed Orem softly. That is exactly why we need them. In the observer's gallery, Admiral Caney of the Terran Defense Force sat perfectly still, listening to the debate rage below. He had been attending these sessions for 3 months now, ever since the Devourer threat became clear. 3 months of watching the galaxy's most advanced civilizations argue while worlds burned. The human delegation was small, just 5 officers and 2 diplomats. They had not been invited to speak, merely to observe. The Council's way of keeping them informed, without granting them any real voice in decisions. Caney found the irony bitter. The same species they considered too violent for membership was now their last hope for survival. Their methods are crude but effective, admitted the representative from Altair Prime. Our intelligence reports show they have conflicts among themselves constantly, yet they always seem to find new ways to win. Exactly my point, Corax interrupted. They fight each other for sport. What does that say about their character? It says they have experience, Orem replied. More experience in warfare than any species in this chamber. The debate continued for hours. Some delegates argued that bringing humans into the military command would be like inviting wolves to guard sheep. Others pointed out that the sheep were already being eaten by something much worse than wolves. Finally, as the artificial suns in the assembly hall dimmed to simulate evening, Chancellor Orem called for order. The hall quieted, and he stood at the central podium, his words carrying clearly through the translation systems. The Devourers have destroyed 12 worlds in 6 months, he began. Our best military minds estimate we have perhaps 8 more months before they reach the core systems. Our traditional strategies have failed completely, We face a choice between adaptation and extinction." He paused, looking directly up at the human observers gallery. "I propose we offer Admiral Caney of the Terran Defense Force full command authority over all Council military assets. In exchange, humanity will be granted immediate full membership in the Galactic Council, with all rights and privileges thereof." The explosion of voices that followed threatened to overwhelm the translation systems entirely. Delegates shouted, in languages that had never been heard together in the same room. Some pounded their desks, others stood and walked out in protest. The crystalline beings from Pleiades flashed so brightly that several other species had to shield their eyes. Through it all, Admiral Caney sat motionless in the gallery, his weathered face showing no emotion. He was a career military officer, 62 years old, with gray hair and scars earned in humanity's expansion wars. He had fought against pirates, rebels, and hostile alien species. He had won battles that everyone said were impossible, but commanding the combined forces of 47 different species against an enemy that adapted to every strategy, that was something new even for him. When the noise finally died down, Orem spoke again. "All in favor?" The vote was close. 24 species in favor, 21 opposed, 2 abstaining. The slimmest possible majority, but enough. All eyes turned toward the observers' gallery. Admiral Caney stood slowly, his joints creaking after sitting still for so long. He looked down at the assembled delegates, beings from across the galaxy, who had just placed their entire civilization in human hands. "I accept," he said simply. His voice, translated into 47 languages simultaneously, carried clearly through the hall. As he walked down from the gallery toward the command podium, Caney thought about what he was really accepting. Not just military command, but responsibility for the survival of trillions of sentient beings. The weight of it should have been crushing. Instead, he felt something he had not experienced in months. Hope. The humans were about to show the galaxy how Earth's children fought when everything was on the line. Win or lose, it would be a lesson the survivors would never forget. The massive war room aboard the Council flagship Unity had never seen anything like the chaos that erupted 48 hours after Admiral Caney took command. What had once been a pristine chamber of polished metal and organized displays now looked like a hurricane had passed through it. Charts covered every available surface, some showing traditional fleet formations crossed out in angry red marks, others displaying attack patterns that made veteran alien officers dizzy just looking at them. Empty coffee cups and meal containers cluttered the workstations. The humans apparently needed constant nutrition during their planning sessions, unlike most species who could focus for days without eating. Lieutenant Commander Torres stood at the central holographic display, gesturing wildly as she explained her latest tactical innovation to a group of bewildered Centaurian flight leaders. The display showed what appeared to be complete chaos. Dozens of small ships moving in seemingly random directions, colliding courses, impossible formations. "You see, the key is unpredictability," she was saying, her hands moving faster than the translators could keep up. "The Devourers adapt by learning patterns. So we don't use patterns. Each squadron moves independently, chooses its own targets, changes strategy every 30 seconds. General Thane, the ship's second in command and one of Centauri's most decorated officers, watched the display with growing alarm. But how do you coordinate? How do you prevent your own forces from destroying each other?" Torres grinned. "We don't prevent it completely. We just make sure we destroy more of them than we do of ourselves." The silence that followed was broken only by the soft humming of the ship's engines. Several alien officers looked physically ill. "That is not how civilized beings conduct warfare," Thane said carefully. "No," agreed Torres, "but it's how we win." Across the room, Chief Engineer Rodriguez was demonstrating his latest modification to a group of horrified Vegan technicians. He had taken apart a standard Council plasma cannon and rebuilt it using parts from 3 different systems that were never meant to work together. "The safety protocols say this should explode," admitted one of the Vegans, her silver skin pale with worry. "Yeah, probably," Rodriguez nodded cheerfully, connecting two cables that sparked ominously. But if it doesn't explode, it'll punch through. Devour armor like paper. Sometimes you have to take risks. The weapon powered up with a sound like tearing metal. Instead of the clean blue glow of standard plasma weapons, this one pulsed with unstable orange energy that made everyone in the room step backward. Testing in 30 minutes, Rodriguez announced. Anyone who wants to watch should probably stand behind something solid. At the far end of the war room, Admiral Caney stood with the senior staff watching his people transform the Council's military doctrine from the ground up. The alien officers looked like they were witnessing either a miracle or a disaster in progress. Your people work very differently than ours, observed Commander Yex, the Altarian intelligence officer. Her species were known for their methodical approach to problems, spending months analyzing data before making decisions. They seem to improvise constantly. Humans are good at improvising, Caney replied. We've had lots of practice. But how do you maintain unit cohesion? How do you ensure your strategies are sound? Caney pointed to a group of human pilots who were arguing loudly about the best way to attack a devourer formation. The argument looked like it might come to blows, with pilots from different backgrounds shouting over each other in at least 3 languages. Watch, he said. As they observed, the argument suddenly shifted. Someone suggested a new approach that combined elements from all the previous ideas. Within minutes, the pilots were working together to refine the strategy, building on each other's suggestions with the same energy they had used to tear them apart. We argue, Caney explained, because arguing makes ideas stronger. The bad ones get destroyed and the good ones get better. And if you're wrong, if the strategy fails, then we try something else, quickly. The first test of human doctrine came sooner than expected. A devourer scout force attacked the mining station at Kepler 186, probably expecting to find the same rigid defensive formations that had failed everywhere else. Instead, they found madness. The Council Defense Fleet, now operating under human tactical command, abandoned every accepted principle of space combat. Instead of forming defensive lines, the ships scattered in all directions. Instead of maintaining formation integrity, squadrons split into smaller groups that attacked from impossible angles. The devourer ships, designed to adapt to predictable patterns, found themselves facing an enemy that had no patterns to learn. Every time they adjusted their defenses to counter one attack, 3 more came from completely different directions using completely different methods. They're using converted mining ships as attack vessels, reported the startled communications officer aboard Unity, and cargo haulers as heavy weapons platforms. The modifications shouldn't be possible. Human engineers don't worry much about what should be possible, Caney replied calmly. The battle lasted 3 hours. When it was over, the Kepler mining station was still intact, and for the first time in months, a devourer ship had been completely destroyed. The wreckage drifted in space, its adaptive armor still trying to configure itself against attacks that were no longer coming. The victory celebration aboard Unity was unlike anything the ship had ever seen. Humans cheered and embraced their alien crewmates, sharing bottles of some kind of fermented beverage they had smuggled aboard. The normally reserved Centaurians found themselves caught up in the excitement, and even the logical Vegans seemed to be smiling. General Thane found Admiral Caney on the observation deck looking out at the debris field where the devourer ship had died. I owe you an apology, Thane said carefully. Your methods are effective, even if they are terrifying. War is terrifying, Caney replied. The trick is making sure the enemy is more terrified than you are. Is that really how humans think about conflict? Caney was quiet for a long moment, watching the salvage crews work to recover valuable materials from the wreckage. We think about survival, he said finally. Everything else is secondary. Your people fight with honor and discipline and follow ancient codes of conduct. That's admirable. But when everything you care about is at stake, honor becomes a luxury you can't afford. And afterward, when the threat is gone, then we remember how to be civilized again, usually. As if summoned by their conversation, Lieutenant Commander Torres burst onto the observation deck, her face flushed with excitement. Admiral, The engineering teams finished analyzing the Devourer wreckage. Rodriguez thinks he can reverse engineer their adaptive armor system and install it on our ships. It'll take some modifications that will probably violate every safety protocol in the book, but do it, Caney interrupted. Torres grinned and rushed off to spread the news. Thane watched her go, then turned back to the Admiral. You didn't even hesitate, he observed. Hesitation gets people killed, Caney replied. We'll worry about the safety protocols after we win the war. Deep in the ship's engineering sections, teams of humans and aliens worked side by side, taking apart technologies that had never been meant to work together and forcing them into new configurations that defied conventional wisdom. Sparks flew, systems overloaded, and occasionally something exploded. But slowly, impossibly, it was working. The Devourers had spent millennia perfecting their approach to conquest. Overwhelming force, adaptive technology, predictable outcomes. They had never faced an enemy that treated the impossible as merely inconvenient. They were about to learn what that felt like. The news of humanity's first victory over the Devourers spread across the galaxy faster than any message system could carry it. On worlds that had spent months preparing for evacuation, people looked up at the stars with something they had almost forgotten: hope. The impossible had happened. The machines could be beaten, but hope came with a price that even the humans found difficult to pay. Captain Reeves stood on the bridge of her heavy cruiser Defiant, watching the tactical display with grim satisfaction. The Battle of Proxima Gate had been raging for 18 hours, and finally they were winning. The massive space gate that connected the outer rim to the core systems was almost secure. Almost. "Ma'am, we've got a problem," called out her tactical officer. "Devourer reinforcements just jumped in system. 3 dreadnoughts, fully adapted to our new weapon configurations." Reeves studied the display. The enemy ships were positioning themselves for a coordinated strike that would punch through the Council defensive line and reach the gate. Once they controlled that choke point, the path to the inner worlds would be wide open. "Options?" she asked quietly. "We could fall back and regroup," suggested her first officer, Lieutenant Beck. "Try to draw them away from the gate. That gives them 12 hours to bring in more ships," Reeves replied. "By then, they'll have adapted to everything we've thrown at them." She looked at the display again, calculating distances and timing. There was one option that might work. One terrible option. "All ships, this is Captain Reeves. Implement final protocol. Repeat, implement final protocol." The bridge crew turned to stare at her. Final protocol was the last resort. The thing you did when everything else had failed. It meant ramming your ship into the enemy at maximum velocity, turning your vessel into a guided missile with a nuclear reactor for a warhead. "Ma'am," Beck said carefully, "final protocol means—" "I know what it means, Lieutenant." Reeves was already pulling up the ship's navigation controls. "Signal the fleet. Tell them to use the opening we create. Don't let it be for nothing." As Defiant accelerated toward the nearest Devourer dreadnought, Reeves opened a channel to the rest of the fleet. Her voice was calm, almost conversational. "This is Captain Reeves to all vessels. It's been an honor serving with you. Give them hell." The collision was visible from 3 star systems away. When Defiant's reactor breached inside the Devourer's hull, the explosion took out all 3 enemy dreadnoughts and cleared the way for the Council fleet to secure the gate. Admiral Caney stood before the memorial wall aboard Unity 3 days later, watching as crews from a dozen different species added new names to the growing list of the dead. Captain Reeves was there now, along with the 400 crew members who had followed her into that final charge. "Your people mourn strangely," observed Dr. Vela, the ship's Altarian medical officer. She had been studying human behavior since the war began, trying to understand what made them so different from other species. "Most civilizations calculate acceptable losses as a percentage. You treat each death as unique." "Because it is unique?" Caney replied. "Every person who dies in this war had a life, dreams, people who loved them. Treating them as numbers makes it easier to forget why we're fighting. But surely the mathematical approach is more efficient? Less emotional trauma for the survivors?" Caney turned to look at her. Maybe that's why we're winning and you were losing. The comment stung, but Vela had to admit there was truth in it. The Altarians had been fighting the Devourers for 8 months before the humans arrived, and they had lost every major engagement. Their careful calculations and risk assessments had proven worthless against an enemy that adapted faster than any computer model could predict. The other species are beginning to adopt your tactics, she said. Even the Centaurians are experimenting with what they call controlled chaos formations. And how's that working out? Better than expected, actually. Their latest engagement resulted in a 60% casualty rate for the enemy, compared to our usual 12%. Caney nodded. They're learning. Slowly, but they're learning. What he didn't say was that they were also learning to pay the human price for victory. The liberation of New Byzantium had cost the lives of 3,000 council soldiers, but it had saved 2 million civilians from devourer processing centers. By the old mathematics, it was a bargain. By human standards, it was a tragedy that happened to be worth it. The Vegan tactical officer approached them, her usually silver skin showing stress patterns that made her look almost gray. Admiral, we've received intelligence on the Devourer's next target. They're massing forces for an assault on the Centauri home system. Caney studied the datapad she handed him. The numbers were sobering. The Devourers had learned from their defeats and were adapting their strategies. The next battle would be worse than anything they had faced so far. Estimated casualties? He asked. Using traditional council doctrine, 95% probability of total defeat. Using human, tactical modifications, 40% casualty rate, 60% chance of victory. 40% casualties. That meant 4 out of every 10 ships in the fleet wouldn't be coming home. 4 out of every 10 crews would end up on the memorial wall. By any rational calculation, those were terrible odds. Send word to the fleet, Caney ordered. We leave for Centauri in 6 hours. As the officers dispersed to prepare for another battle, Admiral Caney remained by the memorial wall. The names stretched across dozens of panels now, written in the flowing scripts of 47 different languages. Humans, Altarians, Centaurians, vegans, and dozens of other species who had learned to fight like humans and die like heroes. Captain. Torres found him there an hour later. Her usually cheerful demeanor was subdued as she studied the wall of names. Second thoughts, Admiral? She asked quietly. Every day, he admitted. But not about the war, about the cost. The council species are starting to understand what we've always known, she said. That freedom isn't free. Someone always pays the price. The question is whether what we're buying is worth what we're spending. Torres was quiet for a moment, then pointed to one section of the memorial wall. You see that name there? Lieutenant Hall from the Kepler battle. He had a wife and 2 kids back on Earth. Sent me pictures of them every week. Caney found the name she was pointing to. I remember him. His wife sent me a message yesterday, thanked me for bringing him home safely. You know what she meant? What? He didn't die running away from the enemy. He died fighting to protect something he believed in. That's the only way humans know how to lose. As she walked away, Caney turned back to the memorial wall. Tomorrow there would be more names. More lives spent in the desperate gamble that courage and sacrifice could triumph over superior technology and numbers. The galaxy was learning that lesson now, one battle at a time. The question was whether they would learn it fast enough to survive. In the ship's communication center, messages poured in from across council space. Requests for human advisors, pleas for tactical assistance, reports of local victories using human-inspired strategies. The infection was spreading. Species that had fought according to ancient traditions for millennia were abandoning their old ways and embracing the chaotic desperation that humans called warfare. Win or lose, the galaxy would never be the same again. The breakthrough came at 3 a.m, ship time, when most of the Unity's crew was asleep. Commander Walsh had been staring at intercepted Devourer communications for 16 straight hours, trying to make sense of patterns that seemed to shift every time she thought she understood them. Then suddenly it clicked. Admiral, she shouted, not caring that she was broadcasting over the ship's general communication system. "Admiral, get down here now." 5 minutes later, Admiral Caney stood in the intelligence center wearing his sleeping clothes and a grim expression. Around him, bleary-eyed analysts gathered to hear what had Commander Walsh so excited. "Look at this," she said, projecting a three-dimensional map of Devourer fleet movements across the last 6 months. "I thought they were just adapting their tactics randomly, learning from each engagement. But that's not what's happening." The display showed hundreds of battles, each one connected by lines of communication between Devourer ships. At first it looked like chaos, but as Walsh manipulated the display, patterns began to emerge. "They're not just adapting," she continued. "They're sharing everything they learn with every other unit through quantum entanglement relays. Every time we develop a new tactic, every ship in their fleet knows about it within minutes." General Thane leaned forward, studying the display. "That's how they adapt so quickly. They're not individual ships learning from experience, and they're all part of one massive intelligence." "Exactly. But look here." Walsh zoomed in on specific communication nodes. "The relay network has weak points, 43 primary transmission stations scattered across 8 star systems. If we could destroy enough of them simultaneously, their coordination would collapse," finished Admiral Kane, understanding immediately. "They'd go from being one intelligent fleet to hundreds of confused individual ships." The room fell silent as everyone grasped the implications. It was brilliant, elegant, and completely impossible. 43 simultaneous strikes," said Dr. Vela slowly, "across 8 star systems, with precise timing down to the second, or the remaining relays would adapt to prevent further attacks. The logistics alone are impossible," added the Centaurian tactical officer. "We don't have enough ships to mount 43 separate assaults. Even if we did, coordinating them across that much space." "What are our odds?" Caney asked quietly. "BI." Ship's computer took 30 seconds to run the calculations. When the answer appeared on screen, several officers actually gasped. 0.3% chance of success. "Acceptable odds," Admiral Caney said calmly. The silence that followed was broken only by the soft humming of the ship's life support systems. Several alien officers stared at the Admiral as if he had just announced his intention to breathe vacuum. "Admiral," General Thane said carefully, "perhaps we should consider alternatives. A more gradual approach, perhaps targeting one relay at a time." "Won't work," Walsh interrupted. "The moment we hit the first relay, the others will adapt. It's all or nothing." "Then it's nothing," declared the Vegan representative. 0.3% odds are not acceptable for any rational species." "Good thing we're not entirely rational," replied Admiral Caney. "Send word to every human ship in the fleet. Volunteers only. If we're doing this, nobody gets ordered to die." Within 6 hours, every single human vessel in the combined fleet had volunteered for the suicide mission. The response was so immediate and unanimous that several alien species began to question whether humans were actually capable of fear. But volunteers were not enough. The mathematics were brutal and unforgiving. Even throwing every human ship at the relays would only cover about half the targets. Then something unprecedented happened. Captain Rex of the Altarian cruiser Harmony requested private communication with Admiral Caney. When the channel opened, his normally calm demeanor showed cracks of desperate determination. "My crew has been studying your tactical methods for months," he said without preamble. "We want to volunteer for the relay mission. Captain, this is a suicide run. Your people don't think like humans. You calculate risks, weigh probabilities." "We've been calculating probabilities for 8 months," Rex interrupted. "The probability that the Devourers will destroy our homeworld if we do nothing is 97%. The probability that your plan will work is 0.3%. The probability that we'll survive if we do nothing is close to 0. He paused, then added quietly, "Sometimes even rational species have to take irrational gambles." The volunteers kept coming. Centaurian battle squadrons that claimed human tactics had awakened their sleeping fire. Draconian warriors who wanted to die in glorious battle rather than slow extinction. Even some vegan science vessels, whose crews had apparently calculated that participating in the mission would provide valuable data about quantum relay destruction. Within 24 hours, they had enough volunteers to hit all 43 targets simultaneously. The fleet that assembled for the final mission was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Ships from a dozen different species, all preparing to follow human tactics into almost certain death. The mission briefings were conducted in 17 different languages. Human tactical officers explained the importance of precise timing, the need for absolute coordination, the fact that most of them would not survive to see the results of their sacrifice. Remember, Admiral Caney told the assembled fleet commanders, "You're not just fighting for your own species anymore. Every ship that dies today dies for the entire galaxy. Make it count." The assault began at 400 Universal Standard Time. Across 8 star systems, mixed species crews threw themselves against heavily fortified positions with desperate fury. The Devourers, confident in their adaptive defenses, found themselves facing enemies who fought like cornered animals. The battle reports came in over open channels, painting a picture of chaos and heroism that would be studied by military historians for centuries. Relay 7 is down. We took 70% casualties, but it's down. Relay 15 destroyed. All hands lost, but mission accomplished. This is Squadron 8. We're down to 1 ship, but the relay is burning. Admiral Caney stood in Unity's command center, watching the tactical display as red markers appeared and disappeared across the galaxy. Each one represented dozens of ships, hundreds of crews, thousands of individual beings who had chosen to embrace the human way of war. "Relay count?" he asked quietly. 37 down, 6 remaining, reported the tactical officer. "But we're losing ships faster than projected. Several squadrons are completely destroyed." The minutes ticked by with agonizing slowness. Each relay that fell brought them closer to success, but the casualty reports were staggering. Entire battle groups vanishing in nuclear fire, brave crews transmitting final status reports even as their ships disintegrated around them. "Relay 41 destroyed," came the announcement. 2 remaining. Then, in the Vega system, Commander Walsh's voice crackled over the communication system one last time. "This is Commander Walsh. Primary relay is heavily defended. We've lost most of the squadron, but I'm making a final run. Tell my family, tell them it was worth it." Her ship, the converted science vessel Discovery, slammed into the primary relay station at maximum velocity. The explosion was visible from 3 planets, and when the radiation cleared, the most important communication node in the Devourer network was gone. "Final relay destroyed," someone shouted. "The network is down." Across the galaxy, Devourer ships suddenly found themselves cut off from the collective intelligence that had guided them for so long. Without coordination, their formations collapsed into chaos. Ships that had fought as one mind were now hundreds of confused individuals, easy prey for the surviving Council forces. The war was not over, but the outcome was no longer in doubt. Admiral Caney sat down heavily in his command chair, the weight of victory almost as crushing as the weight of loss. They had gambled everything on a 0.3% chance and won. The price had been 847,000 lives. 6 months after the quantum relay network collapsed, the last Devourer ship was destroyed in a minor skirmish near the edge of Council space. The machine collective that had terrorized the galaxy for over a year was finally extinct, their adaptive technology scattered among the wreckage of 1,000 battlefields. The formal ceremony to mark the end of the war took place on Earth, in the restored city of Geneva. It was a symbolic choice that surprised no one. The planet that had produced the warriors who saved the galaxy deserved to host the celebration of their victory. Admiral Caney stood on the steps of the newly constructed Alliance Hall, looking out over the crowd that had gathered to witness history. Representatives from every council species were there, along with delegations from 3 new worlds that had requested membership after hearing stories of the war's final year. The building behind him bore inscriptions in 47 languages, but the message was the same in all of them. In memory of those who taught us that acceptable losses are only acceptable if you're willing to be one of them. Chancellor Orum approached the podium with slow, careful steps. The ancient Altarian leader had aged visibly during the war, but his voice was still strong as he addressed the assembled crowd. Today we celebrate not just the end of a war, But the birth of a new kind of alliance, he began. For 3,000 years, the Galactic Council maintained peace through careful diplomacy and measured responses. We were civilized, rational, predictable. He paused, looking directly at Admiral Caney. We were also losing. A murmur passed through the crowd. Several of the older delegates shifted uncomfortably at this admission. The Outer Rim Scouts are reporting strange energy signatures from beyond the galactic edge. Thane replied carefully. It could be nothing, but after the Devourers, we're not taking any chances. Caney nodded grimly. The galaxy had learned that threats could come from anywhere, often when you least expected them. The price of survival was constant vigilance. As the afternoon wore on, the formal ceremonies gave way to more personal moments. In the memorial gardens outside the Alliance Hall, families from across the galaxy came to honor their dead. The gardens were designed in the human style, with individual markers for each of the 847,000 beings who had died implementing human tactics and human values. Commander Torres found Admiral Caney there as the artificial suns began to set over Geneva. She had been promoted to captain and given command of the new Alliance Training Academy, where alien officers learned to think like humans in combat. Strange to think it's really over, she said, studying the rows of memorial stones that stretched to the horizon. Is it? Caney asked. The Devourers are gone, but the galaxy is full of dangers, and now everyone knows that humans are willing to fight. You think that's a bad thing? Caney was quiet for a long moment, watching families place flowers and other remembrances on the graves of the fallen. I think it's a dangerous thing, he said finally. Power attracts attention. Success breeds enemies. The galaxy knows we can win wars now. The question is whether they'll want us to fight their battles for them. And if they do, then we'll have to decide what kind of species we want to be. Protectors or conquerors. Their conversation was interrupted by Dr. Vela, who approached, with her usual careful politeness. The Altarian medical officer had spent the last month studying the psychological effects of human military doctrine on other species. Admiral, I wanted to thank you before I return to my homeworld, she said. The data I've collected will help my people understand how to adapt to your methods without losing who we are. And what did you conclude? Asked Torres. That humans don't fight harder because they're naturally violent, Vela replied. They fight harder because they care more about their comrades, their families, their ideals. The willingness to die for something is directly proportional to how much that something matters to you. She paused, then added quietly, perhaps that's why your tactics work so well for other species. War makes everyone care more deeply about what they might lose. As she walked away, Caney and Torres stood in comfortable silence among the memorial stones. The names were carved in dozens of different scripts representing species that had learned to fight like humans and die like heroes. Do you think it was worth it? Torres asked eventually. Ask me in 50 years. Caney replied. When we see what kind of galaxy we've built with all this sacrifice. The formal signing of the new Alliance Charter took place as the stars appeared in Earth's evening sky. The document was more than just a military agreement. It was a complete restructuring of galactic society, with humanity at its center not as conquerors but as partners in an uncertain future. The key provisions were simple but revolutionary. Any species could request Alliance membership and military protection, but they also had to accept Alliance military advisors and tactical doctrine. The old Council's careful diplomacy was replaced by a more aggressive stance toward external threats, and perhaps most importantly, every member species committed to the principle that had won the war, that some things were worth dying for. As the ceremony concluded and the delegates began to disperse, Admiral Caney found himself approached by a young Centaurian officer he didn't recognize. Sir, the officer said nervously, I wanted to thank you. My homeworld was one of the first the Devourers attacked. My family didn't survive. But knowing that their deaths weren't meaningless, that they led to something like this. He gestured at the Alliance Hall with its mixed crowds of humans and aliens celebrating together. It means something, sir. It all means something. As the young officer walked away, Caney felt the weight of 847,000 deaths settling on his shoulders once again, each one unique, each one precious, each one the price of the galaxy's survival. The memorial gardens would be maintained forever, tended by volunteers from every Alliance species. The names would be read aloud once a year so that future generations would remember the cost of their freedom. And in the Alliance Defense Command, human tactical doctrine would be taught alongside the lessons of that cost. That courage without wisdom was just another form of waste. In the weeks that followed, reports continued to arrive from across the galaxy. Former Council worlds were reorganizing their militaries along human lines. Trade routes that had been abandoned during the war were reopening. Children who had grown up expecting to die young were making plans for the future. The galaxy was healing, but it was healing into something new. Something shaped by human values and human methods. Something that would fight when fighting was necessary, and remember why it was fighting. Admiral Caney stood one last time in the memorial gardens before returning to his new duties. Tomorrow he would begin planning defenses against threats that hadn't even appeared yet. Tomorrow he would train a new generation of warriors to carry on the Alliance's mission. But tonight, he simply stood among the graves and remembered the lesson that had saved them all. That acceptable losses were only acceptable if you were willing to be one of them. The galaxy had learned that lesson well. Whether it would remember it when the next crisis came remained to be seen. Humans taught us that sometimes civilization is a luxury we cannot afford. That sometimes the rational choice is to do something completely irrational. That sometimes the only way to preserve what we value is to risk everything we have. Dr. Kim, Earth's new diplomatic representative, stepped forward to accept the formal charter that would make humanity not just members of the Council, but permanent leaders of its military forces. She was younger than most of the other delegates, with kind eyes that had seen too much war. "Your species fights like demons," observed Ambassador Vex from the Draconian delegation, smoke curling from her nostrils in what humans had learned was a sign of respect. "But you also fight for others. This is unexpected." Dr. Kim smiled. "We've had a lot of practice at both." The ceremony continued with speeches from representatives of every member species, but the real business of the day happened in smaller meetings throughout the city. The galaxy had changed during the war, and the peace would require new ways of thinking about everything from trade to defense. "The frontier reports are encouraging," reported General Thane during a break in the formal proceedings. He had been promoted to head the new Alliance Defense Command, a position that put him in charge of implementing human tactical doctrine across the entire galaxy. "3 more species have requested membership," he continued, "and 2 others are asking for military advisors to help reorganize their defense forces." "Any threats on the horizon?" asked Admiral Caney. He had been promoted as well, to the newly created position of Strategic Defense Coordinator, which meant his job was to prepare for whatever came after the Devourers,